a disparu. Oui. Elle a dit quoi?
And as a consequence, they've diminished,
C'est ça. Oh,
they've watered down what it means to
oui,
be
c'est là. Donc,
British. They're now
je sais pas si
educating.
c'est
Please, do take a seat.
Thank you.
Jacob, is it okay if I stand, or is that going to mess up with the... It's okay? Yeah, cool. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, please. We're going to get started because we have a live stream. People will be tuning in. And also, I'm under a very strict deadline to finish by 7:30 because there is a 3-course dinner being provided. Now, you might ask, well, what's the occasion for this 3-course dinner? Well, we're going to make you work for your supper. We're going to make you work hard for your supper. The occasion for this 3-course dinner is free speech. That's what we're here for. That's what we're here to defend, to fight, and argue for, free speech. So we will be making you work hard over your dinner, talking to you about all the ways in which you will be able to support the work that we're doing. So I just want to say a few words to introduce this evening's topic. You'll all be aware that a month ago, it's kind of hard to recollect all that's happened since then, but a month ago, exactly a month ago, at 4 o'clock the afternoon before NatCon Brussels was due to start at 8 o'clock the next day, at 4 o'clock I shook hands with the owner of Claridge, the third venue for NatCon, because at the previous 2 venues, the mayors had intervened, activists had intervened, and they put enormous pressure on the venue owners to cancel the event. We was at Sofitel the morning of the day before, setting up the audio-visual, getting everything lined up, delighted that Sofitel had stepped in. But the mayor intervened. He sent the police around for a conversation with the hotel. And again, we were asked to leave. But at Claridge, the owner, Mr. Ben, who set up Arabelle Radio here in Belgium, is a big supporter of debate and discussion. And he says, I won't give in. I believe in, even though I don't agree with lots of the speakers that you have on the platform, I think it's important that people talk to each other rather than turning their backs on one another. Have the conversation, is what he said to me. Now, throughout that night, well, up until about 1 o'clock in the morning, we were together, because he was receiving phone calls from the mayor, putting pressure on him to cancel. The lesson of a month ago is that everybody involved in the organisation of the conference, ourselves, the Edmund Burke Foundation, all of the participants that were around us, and the venue owner fought. They fought for free speech. They didn't give up. They didn't back down. They didn't let themselves be intimidated. They fought hard for free speech. And that's what we've got to do, because it's got to be fought for time after time after time. And that's what this event is about understanding that and understanding the specific circumstances that we're in. So, just to tell you about our speakers, because I'm very, very pleased that it's not all about NatCon and the legal case that it is going to be part of tonight. But very, very pleased to have an important report that we're launching tonight. Dr. Norman Lewis, he's a visiting research fellow excuse me, at MCC Brussels, and he's written our latest hard-hitting report called Controlling the Narrative, the EU's Attack on Online Speech. Controlling the Narrative, the EU's Attack on Online Speech. It couldn't be more prescient. European Commissioner Vice President Vera Jourova, just in Politico today, was reported, and she gave a speech earlier today, about the rise of disinformation generated by AI and promoted on social media, the rise of disinformation that's taking place over the next period in the run-up to the European elections. Disinformation that is being used to justify the EU controlling more and more and more of what people can say online. So that's what Norman's report's going to be about, or is about, and it's what Norman's going to talk about. And then after Norman, I'm really, really pleased to have Johan Rimok here. Excuse me if I pronounce that incorrectly. But Johan is a barrister, as we would say in the UK, or an advocate, I think you might say here, with the Brussels Bar. He's a specialist in cases involving freedom of expression. He's worked and represented for people like Nigel Farage, and also the French author Renaud Camus. And we're really pleased because we have instructed Johan as our lawyer to sue Emir Kir, the mayor of Saint-Just-Tenude. Okay, and so we're really looking forward to the great work that Johan will do for us, not just to teach the mayor a lesson, but rather to underscore a really, really important point. That yes, there are powerful people around, and yes, there are people who want to shut down debate, but yes, there are people and organisations prepared to fight back. So we really look forward to hearing from you as well. Okay, so without further ado, we'll hand over to Norman.
Can I remain seated?
Yeah, please. Round of applause, please.
I think you should wait till you hear what I've got to say before you. Well, good evening. Thank you, Tony. Yes, this is a really important conversation that we started, and hopefully with our report will provoke externally. There's 3 points I want to try and cover. The first is that when we look at hate speech and disinformation, we should understand that the real purpose of these laws is not to curb hateful speech in society, but it's actually to curb free speech. And I will reiterate what I mean by that. It's a narrative that's coming out of the EU, which itself is a disinformation narrative, because this threat of hate speech is an exaggeration, and I will show you and I will discuss with you why it is such a imprecise term, why it's a kind of term for all seasons that can be interpreted however the authorities wish to do so. The second point is that there is a hate campaign behind all of this, but it's not a hate campaign about hate speech. It's actually the European citizens who are under the attack from the hateful attitude of the EU itself, who regard them as children, as people that need to be protected from bad views, from hate speech, from disinformation. They're like children. They don't have the moral independence to be able to distinguish between truth and untruth, and therefore susceptible to all these lies and ruses. So there is a hatred at the heart of this, but it's the hatred of the EU bureaucracy, the Eurocrats, against the demos of European member states. The third point, and perhaps the one I'll spend the most time on, is the automation of hate speech detection through the application of artificial intelligence. And this is a really important point that not many people are talking about, because they're all focused on the exaggeration of AI, saying that AI and disinformation and deep fakes and all of that is the biggest threat to democracy. My argument is that actually it's the use by the EU of AI to detect and automatically detect and take down hate speech, what they call hate speech, that is a real threat to the future of debate, and particularly for the forthcoming elections. So let me just get some stuff out of the way about hate speech, about what is hate speech. And the thing that really struck me when I started doing this research was just how imprecise the term actually is, and how the definitions range so widely. Now, I'm going to bore you with one quote, and I'm afraid you have to listen to this quote because I had to read lots of this stuff. And I'm going to impose this upon you because, my God, it was boring. Sorry about the lawyer stuff, but the legal stuff is just unbelievable. So anyway, this comes from the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, right, a very important body that we discuss in some detail in the report. Here's the quote. The advocacy, promotion, or incitement in any form of the denigration, hatred, or vilification of a person or group of persons, as well as any harassment, insult, negative stereotyping, stigmatization, or threat in respect of such a person or groups of persons, and the justification of all the preceding types of expression on the grounds of race, color, descent, national or ethnic origin, age, disability, language, religion, or belief, sex, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, and other personal characteristics or status. Now, that level of precision, right, is what you can expect when you start discussing hate speech. And what is hate speech? And there's no agreed definition on what it actually is. And I was looking at this and I was really curious. What is it? You know, I mean, this is supposed to be illegal, and the legal, you know, taxonomy should be one that's very precise. You know, this can result in people being imprisoned, fined, or whatever, reputations destroyed. But that, how do you interpret that? So, personal characteristics or status, for example. So what are we going to look at? So the next added to the shopping list will be people who've got ginger hair. You know, you can't say anything about them. Or short people, or short and fat people. Maybe even short, fat people who have got ginger hair. The point I'm making is that it's like a shopping list that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. And what I realized was that this imprecision is deliberate. Precisely because this is not about protecting minority groups. This is about curbing free speech. It's about determining a narrative that says that we as the authorities can decide what can and cannot be said. It's not about the specifics of this. It's really about creating a victim-based culture which is in need of protection from speech. Not about protecting free speech, but protecting minorities from speech. And this is a very, very important point because in EU today, I would argue, free speech does not exist, but freedom from speech has now been institutionalized through hate speech legislation, etc. It just means that hate speech is now in the eye of the beholder. So whoever's in authority, whatever they decide is out of court. They can decide that this is what's not allowed or not enabled. It really is part of a systematic attempt by the EU to create what I call in the report a ministry of truth. That, you know, they will decide, you know, what cannot be said, heard, or even thought. And I'll come back to that when I come to the AI stuff. And if you look at the panoply of laws that they've created and the institutions that they've created, it is what I call in the report a censorship operating system. I mean, you know, you've got the Apple operating system, you've got all these operating, but this is a censorship operating system. So you've got from, you know, through this kind of network of experts, NGOs, the Commission itself, the Council of Europe, with their appointed organizations like ECRI, etc. You have this kind of network of people who are, basically they are there to just police and to look at what's being said and to say, no, that's out of line, you can't say that, you can't say this, you can't do that. That they are now the purveyors of the truth. This is Orwell's Ministry of Truth. And it definitely exists. The laws that they have back this up completely. Artificial Intelligence Act, the Child Sexual Abuse Online, the Media Freedom, I love the terminology, the Media Freedom Act, the Digital Services Act, all of these laws, together with these relationships, is this incredible machine that is geared towards doing one thing, and that is to control what can and cannot be legitimately said within Europe. And so you have to ask yourself, why are they doing this? You know, what is behind this? And I go into this a little bit in the report, and I won't have much time to talk about it now. But this, I think, is a very fundamental point, that you have to understand that this is driven by an inner need of the Eurocrats. This is not an episodic, momentary lapse. This is not something that's going away. This is something that is going to be extended and is going to continue. It's an ever-expanding moral crusade, precisely because the EU as an institution has always been a top-down phenomenon. It's not been an organic development in Europe. It's not rooted in popular sovereignty. In fact, it's rooted in every attempt to try and dissuade the popular will away from any kind of attachment to their nation states towards this federal monopoly of this kind of rainbow nation, this federalism. And so as a consequence, the EU and the elite, the people that control this, are always on the defensive. They're always feeling that they need to seek legitimacy continuously. And so why the narrative becomes so important is because through that they can control what can and cannot be said in a way that doesn't challenge their authority or challenge their right to rule or whatever. And so that's really what it comes down to. You know, the creation of the EU was a system that separates power and control in Europe from any expressions of the popular will. And so that's what they have to rubbish, is any sentiment. And now, as we come towards the election and we see the projections that the far right, which they, you know, the slurs and everything that they use, but that there's now, it seems to be a groundswell against the EU, you can be sure, just as Tony indicated, that they are going to go even more on the offensive against this to curb the far right and fake news and etc. That this is just going to become, there's going to be a huge amount of this stuff coming up, because they fear the fact that what might happen in these elections, that they're going to be exposed, that the gap between them and ordinary people, from farmers onwards, across the whole of Europe, is widening continuously and now threatens to upset the status quo. So there is a legitimacy problem. It is a foundational crisis within the elite, which is reproduced every decade, and I think we're going to now see it reproduced in a way which is going to be even more fervent than it's been in the past. Which is why the AI discussion is so important. Because if you look at the AI discussion, you would think that artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, large language models, generative AI, is the biggest threat to democracy, because there's going to be all these deep fakes and we're not going to be able to distinguish the truth from. But what people are not talking about is how the EU are encouraging big tech to use AI to detect hate speech. So they're creating these taxonomies online of words that are, you know, regarded as hate speech. They are creating systems whereby these things are now being learned, they're being taught and tutored by human beings in order to automate this in the future, so they can just take stuff down whenever it transgresses what they think is legitimate speech or not. You just have to look at the EU's transparency data site, their database that they've created under the Digital Services Act. It is a remarkable document or site, because every time you go in there, there's like 100,000 more things that have been taken down. And if you look at those data, some of the data, and you look under hate speech, there are literally hundreds of thousands of things that have been taken down under the auspices of them being denoted as hate speech. They never specify what the content is. That is not open to the public. That only they and some of their expert NGOs, fact checkers and all of that, are the ones that have got access to that. We don't. So we don't really know what they're talking about. But the very fact that there are hundreds of thousands of posts being taken down all the time without any of us even knowing about it, that's the most important point about this. It is automating the semantic engineering of society. Because what they are doing is they are creating these indexes, this semantic index of words. And not only that, they are demanding in order for them to be able to train these machines better, that they provide more and more data, not just on the words that people are using, but who's doing what they call this ecosystem of hatred. In other words, they're tracking who ticks particular posts, who circulates posts, who is sharing stuff with other people, where they're from, what time of day they do it, or that they're gathering a huge amount of data. And what's so remarkable about this, ladies and gentlemen, is that here we have this institution that swears by the rule of law, that the rule of law is like God's word on earth. And they themselves are transgressing even their own laws, particularly the GDPR around data, around privacy. That they are themselves abrogating their own legislation in order to achieve what they really want to achieve, which is to semantically engineer the internet and online, the public square of the 21st century. They want to control what appears there, what can be said and what cannot be said. And that is remarkably dangerous, because it's not just about the language, it's about the networks, the ecosystem. I mean, the language they use is quite authoritarian. The implications are so dire for the future of rights and democracy in this country. I'll end on one thing, which is this. What I love about the EU, I hate, it's kind of close balance, is the way they always talk about EU values. These are the new values that we have. And their values today are that, freedom of speech is dangerous because it allows the far right to express themselves. So we need to defend people from that. So we need freedom from speech. It's really lovely. But I'd suggest that we have to go back to real European values. We need to go back to the values of the Enlightenment, particularly to the brilliant Baruch Spinoza, the great Dutchman of the Enlightenment, who had a fantastic view on this whole thing, who actually laid the moral and intellectual framework for the modern ideas of freedom, where he argued his trailblazing epitaph on free speech, which I think we should adopt as the thing that we should popularize, was, in a free state, every man may think what he likes and say what he thinks. Because what he assumed was that we all had the ability to judge what is true and false. So not just our ability to speak, but to hear and to judge for ourselves what is the truth or not. And it's the court of public opinion. So in the case where people are talking about hate speech, we should say, no, we want more free speech. We should, if people want to hate, that's their problem. That's entirely up to them. I think hate can sometimes be a good thing. But we should demand that every man should think for themselves, say what they like, and say what they think. And that should be the mantle that we should adopt from now on, which I'm hoping is precisely what our legal case is going to represent in real concrete terms.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Norm. Okay, thanks ever so much. So we're going to move over to you, Johan. And I know you've got a lot of experience in this arena, so we're really keen to hear what you've got to say. Perhaps just one thing I should just make clear, because not everyone knows and understands, that in the middle of NatCon, when we were going toe-to-toe with the police and everything was going on and people were fighting for free speech, we did manage to get through the ADF, an organisation that supports free speech, a lawyer to the Court of State, and the judge ruled for a suspension of the mayor's police order, and at the same time an annulment of that order was filed, which is being processed. So what that means is, if I get it correct, and you'll correct me if I get it wrong, is that simultaneously we filed for a suspension of the mayor's police order, and also then subsequently a complete annulment of that order. And we're waiting for the outcome of that. Whereas Johan who can give you more information, you're going to be taking that much, much further with taking the mayor to court for damages.
Absolutely correct. Well, I'm not going to give you much legal stuff and legal quotes, but you're going to have to bear my French accent. Yes.
We love
I don't know
French
what's worse. Everybody, of course, loves to underline how freedom of speech is important. Everybody shakes hands and celebrated it. And when I say everybody, of course, I'm thinking of political authorities. But I have a simply preliminary remark. History of free speech is the history of an idea that is time and space, conditioned conception of Christianity. This is the sole idea that I would like to underline before you, contrary to a common assumption. An attorney, or as my friend Dr. Lewis says, a barrister, should not be interested in theoretical ideas. An attorney's work simply consists in choosing arm and choosing the battlefield. But let me please try to give you this idea. Freedom of speech is one of the embodiment and concrete manifestation of Christianity, that is to say, of Europe. We don't talk about free speech in China, nor we do in India or in Russia, as we do here. Free speech is an European idea. Defending free speech is defending Europe, is defending ourselves, is defending our majorities, our ideas, our conception, and finally, our way of living. So now, my short experience in the battlefield of courtrooms leads me to the following remarks. Free speech, of course, is protected by the highest standards, but it is nothing but conditional and contingent and subjective right. You can vote without conditions, without worrying of the ballot paper that you put in the envelope. You choose and you vote. You can work without conditions. Of course, every field has its own regulation, but the principle, the very idea of working is a fundamental right. You can buy a car, you can open 12 accounts on Facebook, you can have a private life, you can still think those are fundamental rights. But you cannot express yourself in the same way. Nothing would more be untrue than pretending that you can express an opinion in public without taking care of your words. The business of ideas is not a free business. Of course, Belgian Constitution, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, European Convention of Human Rights, all the case laws in Belgium, French courts, all of these texts and courts protect free speech. But nevertheless, something remains. Before expressing yourself, you still have to take a look to the official doctrine and to check how your idea and how your expression can escape classifications as hate speech. And when Dr. Lewis talked about, I wrote it, the automation of detecting hate speech by AI, this is a horrible perspective. So you're talking about the future, the immediate future. Yeah, of course. But that's a horrible perspective. My second remark, the animation, the vivacity of the political debate in Belgium has never been the same as in France or in England, for example. But things change. Belgium is sitting on various influences, and the balance is currently shifting. On the one hand, the very high score of the political parties in Flanders and the vivacity of these political parties. On the other hand, the growing Islamization of Brussels is a frontal contradiction with the woke and progressist ideology. This ideology is now to be put into grim reality. And we have at last the rebirth of right political movements here. These are some of the decisive changing factors. The Belgian Conseil d'État, the Belgian Supreme Court's case law is a very interesting reflect of this reality. Of course, a quick check of its case law shows that free speech cases are quite few and very few. How could we summarize the Belgian case law on this point? How could I expose you the political stake that urges and emerges right now? Let's try. The judicial framework relies on two recent decisions that have been rendered by the Dutch-speaking chamber, the Flemish chamber of the Conseil d'État in 2018 and 2023. The Conseil d'État clearly states in this decision that, quote, the mere fact or the fear of a serious disturbance does not justify the ban of a demonstration. This court adds that the government should protect the demonstrators in the exercise of their freedom of demonstration. In the Flemish case law of the Conseil d'État, freedom of speech prevails. It takes precedence over most of disturbance risk. This is the political issue. This case law, this rule, this judicial framework has to be now integrated by the French-speaking political authorities. And this is what we will try to do. We will ask for the definitive annulment of the decision of the ban of the National Convention of last month after its suspension on emergency grounds, and we will at last ask for damages in a separate action. This is the political issue, and this is the only way for Brussels and the whole Wallonia to breathe again out of the socialist and woke ideology, out of the overuse of power, of the misuse of power of few mayors, of few authorities, as the Saint-Just-en-Node mayor who tried to ban this convention of last April. This ban was a real disgrace. It was honestly shameful for Belgium. One can simply imagine the Belgian Prime Minister, who certainly voted for the introduction of an infringement procedure against Hungary, or for sending a letter of formal notice, considering that the rule of law is violated over there in Hungary. What can we seriously criticize when freedom of speech do not exist in our own country? That explains, I think, Alexander De Croo's tweet, I presume, condemning Emir Kir's ban order, a very strong and legitimate shame feeling. My third remark would simply be a concrete case. What is hate speech and what is not hate speech? We, of course, know what is hate speech, but sometimes we meet some courageous judges. A French example. Renaud Camus, the famous French writer, the author of the common and worldwide expression of great replacement, who I'm honored to defend and represent since many years. So Renaud Camus once made the following tweet on Twitter, quote, this is a quote, not a legal quote, but it's a quote. A box of condoms offered in Africa is 3 drowned persons in less in the Mediterranean Sea, 100,000 euros saved for the family allowance funds, 2 prison cells released, and 3 centimeters of the polar pack ice preserved. End of the quote. This tweet was, of course, of a mostly light and humorous tone. It was a way to denounce the great replacement in its most terrible consequences. But this tweet was reported by 6 or 7 anti-racist offices, considering that it was hate speech. So we had a trial, and we had a 5 hours hearing on this tweet. They, our opponents, our adversaries, they weren't AI, they were real person. Our opponents, they rely on all the classical arguments of the proponent of hate speech. Racism of this speech, Renaud Camus is not racist. Negationism of it, and Renaud Camus is not negationist. They said that Renaud Camus, by this tweet, wanted to prevent Africans from birthing, which was completely crazy. They said that this tweet was pre-genocidal. So they used and operated all of the weapons, all of the arms, the weapons of language that the notion of hate speech offers. A weapon of language is this sort of accusation that freaks out, that paralyzes you once it is uttered. It creates an atmosphere which itself is only to be a presupposition for an action. We won in the first instance, we won in appeal, and the court held that there were no intent to harm, that this tweet was an exaggeration contributing to the public interest debate on demographic decline and on the perverse consequences of population increase. We still have courageous judge. And now my last remark. Of course, as soon as you accuse of racism, anti-Semitism, supremacism, you're done. These are the most terrible weapons of language. And the ban that was signed by Saint-Just-Not's mayor was full of these weapons of language. But these weapons of language have, of course, a different scope depending on who is the accusator and of who is the accused person. We had last Saturday in Paris a demonstration of people that clearly are fascist. On the side of the demonstration, a black young girl was calling them racist and fascist. And they were certainly fascist and racist. She was filmed, and this sequence was seen on Twitter many thousands of times. She had, quote, "You dirty white piece of shit," end of the quote. I'm sorry for the rudeness and the vulgarity of the expression, but that's what she added literally. She was filmed. A few hours later, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the far-left French chief, tweeted, quote, "France is her," end of the quote. This is the best illustration of what you can say in Paris or in Brussels in 2024 without being sued, without being attacked, without being accused. Here we can call her a racist because this weapon of language does not have any effect on her. This is what we need to change, and this is what is at stake. Hate speech is about preventing majority of France, of Belgium, of Europe from defending itself. Hate speech is all about silencing this majority. And to conclude, at the end of the day, what is free speech? What is freedom of speech? It's nothing but the number of think tanks, of circles, of association, of initiative, of group of pressure on our parliaments and before our courts. Freedom of speech is not a concrete and fixed fundamental right. It's a permanent construction. It's a political and judicial war à outrance. This is what our adversaries understood for many years. Of course, they've done a lot to us, decades of effort trying to silence us, but they simply won't succeed. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thanks ever so much, Johan. Really fascinating ideas there. I'm going to open up to the audience in 5 or 10 minutes. I just want to ask you a couple, because your topics were started off very, very different, and then with a lot of important overlaps. I just want to ask you a couple of questions so that you can reflect a bit on what you've each said. But starting with you, Johan, and interested to hear a little bit more, and then Norman's take on this. You seem to describe Belgium as slightly distinct in its context, yeah, and obviously it is very distinct as a country with Flanders and Wallonia and the two very different cultures. And you reference sort of the UK and France as perhaps having a better tradition or hinting at a better tradition of free speech. Yet if we look at Scotland, for example, the home of many wonderful Enlightenment thinkers, they're introducing the most draconian hate speech laws. If we look at Ireland, they're introducing hate speech laws. So this hate speech phenomenon seems to be cutting across lots and lots of countries at the moment. So I guess my question to you is, How distinct is Belgium with regards to hate speech and free speech? And do you recognise a broader, wider trend that perhaps was in Norman's comments about the sort of top-down, technocratic, fearful elite trying to control free speech more broadly? In other words, is it distinctly a Belgian phenomenon that you're recognising, or can you see a much bigger phenomenon coming from the elite across Europe?
Oh, much more broader. It's not a Belgian phenomenon. You have two Belgium. You have the French-speaking one and you have the Flemish-speaking one. You go before the Flemish chamber of the Supreme Court and you will see a protection of freedom of speech. You go before the French-speaking chamber and you will see that they are much more restrictive and much more protective of freedom of speech. So that's the first point. The second point is, in my view, this phenomenon, it's much broader than Belgium, much bigger than France, much bigger than Germany. It comes from the EU. It's part of the structure of the European Union. The idea that commissioner can make rules applicable to a whole continent. And as Dr. Lewis said it very well, in a complete disconnection with people. Normally, in a democracy, you make a rule and then you're accountable of the rule that you made before the people or before this part of the people that elected you. This doesn't exist. And so I think that it's a technocratic phenomenon that comes from Brussels, as we say, that comes from the EU. And this is the last point, hate speech law are voted in most of the countries, well, in France and in Belgium, surely, since the 80s. So they are very old. I guess that was a trend at this period. Now, the hate speech laws are really unpopular and more unpopular. And the paradox is that at this time that hate speech laws are really unpopular, the European Union elites vote and propose restriction of freedom of speech that are more and more violent. Voilà.
Voila. Well, that was a great point. Great point. Stop me in my tracks. Okay, so Norman, what's your take on this sort of development of this? You talked about ecosystems, that they're using the AI to investigate and log these ecosystems of hate. And I guess this is pretty novel stuff. This is sort of, seems like, as you said, quite futuristic, and what have you, but it's actually happening. What is it that about our culture that has allowed us to get to this point where this can happen without hardly anyone knowing about it, let alone anybody kicking up a big fuss about it?
Well, have you got a few hours? I'll explain that. Well, I think it's a combination of things, but I think the most important thing about it is that it's representative of a culture that no longer believes in people. That no longer believes that ordinary people have got agency, that they are the subjects of society. They are now seen as the kind of objects of intervention. And if you look at something like Josep Borrell's speech that he made a few months ago, last month, in the lead up to the elections, where he spoke about hate speech and disinformation being like a virus that will get into the brains of people, and it's worse than somebody with a bomb because this will affect everybody and it will infect. It was like talking like COVID. That this was something that was so what you see here is this presentation of speech as being an area for kind of almost like a health intervention to stop the spread of this virus, because at the root of it, and this is why I think it's a broad phenomenon, not just within the EU, the EU doesn't have a monopoly on contempt for ordinary people. The elites all over the Western world have a similar kind of attitude towards it, this kind of managerial, technocratic attitude. And therefore, where this all comes together is in the notion that, you know, this has to be managed. So you can't have free speech, because free speech is unpredictable. And, you know, who knows? You know, it's quite remarkable that they will defend freedom from speech as a tenet now of democracy. That democracy can be protected because in allowing free speech, we're allowing anybody to say what they like. And who knows where this will lead, because it's like a virus. It will just infuse the body politic, blah, blah, blah. And so, you know, really it comes down to a complete contempt for ordinary people. And I think that's what we've got to really be clear about. This is the part of the narrative that we really have to push back on very, very strongly, by going over their heads or under their heads or whatever, by appealing to ordinary people, by saying, look, we trust ordinary people. And not only that, we trust in the court of public opinion, right, where anybody can say what they like, anybody can think what they like. We want that out in the open. I just want to give you one quote. I prepared this earlier, but I came across this.
Is it as good as his quote was?
I think this is better, but anyway. This is a quote from Luther, right, in 1542, defending a Swiss bookmaker, a book printer, for translating the Quran into Latin. And Luther wrote, I won't read you the whole quote, it's really, really good. But he basically says, that in order to show how cursed, abominable, and desperate a book this is, it's full of lies, fables, abominations that the Turks conceal and gloss over. To honor Christ, he says, to do good for Christians, to harm the Turks, to vex the devil, set this book free and don't withhold it. One must open sores and wounds in order to heal them. And that is a remarkable thing. That's precisely the point about free speech. Let's open the sores and wounds. Let them come out into the open, because then we can deal with them. Not like our elites, who treat us as patients, as objects that have to be, you know, therapeutized and insulated and treated like we're kind of, you know, objects of a health system, rather than the subjects who can make up their own minds.
Great, thanks very much. Right, I'm keen to bring the audience in, so I think we've got a couple of roving mics. So have your questions and points ready. One thing I would be very interested to hear from the audience, but no obligation, but is your assessment of the prospects for the fight back. To what extent, when we've heard of these difficulties, we've experienced them directly just recently, and we've heard about this online situation, which is quite fresh and new. To what extent do people think there is a decent prospect for pushing back, for fighting back? I'm all very passionate about it, but I recognise I might be in a bit of a minority. So I'm quite interested in the take of you in the audience on that prospect for pushing back, fighting back, and standing our ground. Okay, but whatever you want to say. If we go first, please, this gentleman in the blue shirt, and then the other microphone to Professor Werner, Professor Werner Patzelt, my colleague.
One of the things that you didn't mention was what is taking place in universities, where we seem to have a right not to be offended by what you are asked to read. When I studied at university, I did political thought papers, and I made it a point to read both Mein Kampf and the Communist Manifesto, because you have to read the original in order to understand their significance as ideas. And surely an absolutely key part of the fight back is to ensure that students at university are not allowed to reject texts on the grounds that they find them too upsetting and too offensive.
Thank you very much. Please, Werner.
Since I agree with everything which has been told by the panelists, I simply want to add 2 or 3 points. Point one, when I was a student, center-right was in the possession of intellectual hegemony in Germany. Then the left always claimed you can protect liberty to death if you impose restrictions of thought and speech on whatever. It was from a minoritarian position that this criticism was raised. Now the left is in possession of intellectual and cultural hegemony. The roles have switched. So it's a power struggle, of course, and we need to be aware of the fact that it is about political power. And let us hope that one day, when we are again in the possession of intellectual hegemony, we will not behave like the leftists and the woke do right now. Second point, across the words of hate speech, I came as a student when studying East Germany, German Democratic Republic. They even had a crime called hate speech against the state, which we rephrase today in West Germany. In Germany, we rephrase as anti-constitutional hate speech. What was meant? In the constitution of the GDR, you could read, famous Article 5, everybody is entitled to free speech according to the principles of this constitution. And the main principle of the Constitution was to be found in Article number 1, as is good German tradition, which says the German Democratic Republic is the political organization of the working class under the guidance of the Communist Party. Okay, so hate speech is whatever challenges the leading role of those who are in possession of power. If you look at these things, not say from a political standpoint, but in a systematic way, you see, exactly the same thing is the case right now. We are free to express ourselves. We have to avoid hate speech, not being racist and whatever else. Last point I want to mention, nearly last point. In a world where, so to speak, the internet cannot be trusted because there is so much hate speech, wrong information, and so on there, that we need artificial intelligence to get in control of all of that. One thing regains a new value. Those are face-to-face encounters. Those are discussions where political opponents meet each other, exchange arguments. And therefore, it is really not a crime, but something quite close to a dishonesty, at least, to prevent events to happen in which political controversies could be fought out. We should really do much more for personal discussions of political opponents. It is not a crime to be a political opponent. The criminal act starts when you prevent this. Last point, because I was talking about German constitutions. My German compatriot, Karl Marx, made many correct observations and drew quite constructive conclusions from some of them. In one of his famous quotations, he says, if you want to bring circumstances, established structures to dancing movements, you have to play to them their own tune. What does this mean? Why? And I do this in my political commentaries. We should use the language of our woke friends. Condense what they are saying, not changing a word, but changing the arrangement. Then we are not using hate speech, because it's their speech, but we make clear much of the liberty offending, not nonsense, but well thought out, arrogant sense they set into the world.
Okay.
Marx has been right.
Thank you, Werner. Right. Welcome to Applaud. Please, we've got the other microphone here to Sergio, and then over there, the other one to Jan McVarish from the Free Speech Union, who's got the white top on. I will come to you. I will come to you. Are you making a note?
No, just do that.
Thank you. Very briefly, 2 points. One is historical, and it refers to the origin of hate speech laws, which goes back to the Declaration of 48, Human Rights Declaration. And it was an argument by the Soviet Union about how freedom of speech should be somehow limited. There was a vociferous response to this from the United States, because they knew what free speech means. And they were joined by Belgium. Now, what happened from then to this part is a question mark, right? The second point is, while you were having trouble with the NatCon here, I was back home in Australia. And so I mean, really interesting what's happening there. You would say, well, Australia is far away, the ass end of the world. We're in Europe. But listen to this. In Australia, we now have a figure called an e-commissioner, which is like the modern version of a blasphemy commissar. And the e-commissioner, well, while I was there, saw it happen. You might have heard of this. A bishop got stabbed by something that in Belgium they would call a youth. You know? When you see in the newspaper, a youth. So you know what happened, right? There was a clip of the stabbing. You probably have saw the clip. The e-commissioner decided that it should be removed from Twitter. Mind you, the e-commissioner used to work for Twitter. She made her career working for the old Twitter. But now she decided that it should be eliminated. And it should not only be eliminated for Australia, but it should be eliminated for the world. So now we have a court case in Australia that will actually, if successful for the e-commissioner, eliminate content for Europe as well as for the rest of the. So this is the new situation that we are up against. It's not just the European Union, but actually decisions made for Europeans that are completely outside of the boundaries and even the knowledge of Europeans themselves.
Okay, thanks ever so much. Thank you. Right, I'm just going to take one more, and then I'll bring you both back, because otherwise it's too much for you to remember. Please.
Yes, Jan McVarish from the Free Speech Union in the UK. I just wonder whether it's important to connect up online censorship with other, with censorship of actual sort of freedom of association and kind of the physical freedom. Because if you think about the censorship of NatCon, that wasn't an online phenomenon at all. That the visible power of that moment was the fact that you had police outside of your venue, and the physical freedom of you to associate with whoever you wish to associate with was the thing that was undermined. And I think that has a power to it which online censorship doesn't have when it comes to appealing to people's sort of moral, a sense of kind of moral affront. So the same might apply to the Scottish Hate Crime Act as well, where the thing that really resonated with people was the fact that part of the act did away with what was known previously as the dwelling defence. And this meant that, or potentially means that people's private conversations around their dinner tables could be physically policed if they were to be reported to the authorities. And that kind of thing really resonates with people, whereas I wonder whether the fact that the online space is new and there are new norms that are not the same norms as those which we understand and have kind of got a moral power to them in our political association, in our kind of political traditions. So we kind of, I don't know about you, but I'm actually always very blasé about privacy and then about freedom when it comes to online. And we sort of, because we don't know what the norms ought to be. Whereas when it comes to sort of the political norms of democracy, we do know what those are. And there's still a kind of residual attachment to those kinds of things, like being able to meet in a physical space, like being able to speak on the street, for example, or hold a sign or a flag. And I just wonder how important it is to make the connection between the two spheres.
Great, thanks very much. I'll let Johan and Norman come back on some of those points. Don't need to answer them all, the ones that you're particularly keen to answer. And then we'll go back out for one more round of questions and get everybody else in. Okay. Johan, anything you want to pick up on?
I'm not going to add anything. I agreed with the point of view that were expressed, and I won't give much more comments on the case. So
No, okay.
Voilà.
May I then, just because it has been raised by a couple of people, and it's not a legal question, so it's just to get your take on it, the importance of face-to-face, which has just been emphasised, both Werner's point about face-to-face encounters and Jan, what you were just saying there about the freedom of association. This is something very visceral, very real, and when it's interrupted, people can connect with that. Do you see, have there been many instances like the NatCon situation? Is it a rarity? Is it a blip? Or have there been in Belgium many instances of attempting to cancel events? I mean, certainly when I've spoken to venues, and we were trying to find venues to replace the venue that we first lost, and actually welcome Mr. Ben, by the way, who kindly joined us from Claridge. The impression I've got from talking to venues is that there is like a sort of symbiotic relationship between activists who target the venues, try and get them to be intimidated and scared, intimidate their staff, run these sort of email campaigns, and then try and get officialdom involved in getting the venue to back off and to cancel the event. Is this a rare occurrence, or has this attempt to block freedom of association in this way? Are there lots of examples of this in Belgium?
As the National Convention a month ago, no. This is unprecedented. It's unprecedented. It was really a shame, I think, for Belgium, because you had here another prime minister who was invited to talk. So the Belgian prime minister, knowing that his colleague, Orban, was coming to a convention that was at last forbidden, that I think is totally unprecedented. That's the first point. The second point is that you don't have many bans, you don't have many decisions like that, because you don't have many political activity in the French-speaking part of Belgium. You have some. I already had case like that. I had case in last November, emergency one, but they are very few. Case law on free speech is mostly concerning some disciplinary measures that organization takes against their employee who made bad comments or dirty comments on Facebook or publicly. But you don't have these kinds of cases. And this case is really unprecedented. And I think, that's my own, it's only my opinion, I think that, I'm going to give you an example. The mayor of Saint-Just-en-Node, last year, Renaud Camus came in Belgium. He was invited by the Flemish Parliament. He was invited to make a speech. And the Flemish Parliament is on the city of Saint-Just-en-Node too. And the same mayor, Emir Kir, took a decision forbidding to Renaud Camus to take a walk on the territory of the city of Saint-Just-en-Node. So we received the ban. And honestly, we had a little bit, we laughed on it because it was a little bit funny. The situation was funny. We didn't have, Renaud Camus didn't have the project to make a big walk in this city. It was a little bit funny, but in reality, it's really serious. So you can have this kind of amusing decision, but the ban of a conference in which you have so important personalities as a prime minister, as a national talker, this is totally unprecedented.
Okay.
Well.
Voilà. Right. Norman, what do you want to pick up on?
Just one remark in response to what Jan was raising. I think you're right. I think it's very important to keep that in mind. But I think the two are very much linked. You know, for me, free speech, and why I'm going on about the online is because I don't think people have woken up to the extent to which they are now doing this and what a threat that represents. Because to me, free speech is the kind of foundational of everything. Freedom of association would be meaningless without free speech. And so any attack on free speech, to me, is like pivotal. But of course, in all of these things, we would defend freedom of association, everything that we did, what happened with NatCon, you know, it's all very much connected. And where I think the connection comes in, and this is in response to what you just said, I thought what was so remarkable about what happened was the arrogance, the kind of, the assumption that he could write this, declare this illegal in an open attack on free speech.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't, you know, you would think that these people, you know, would have their guile, the intelligence to know that the last thing you want to do is to really, you know, launch something on something so fundamental as free speech. So what you would have expected was they would have come and said, well, it's a health care, you know, there's a health and safety issue here, or, you know, whatever. But to not do that, it just seems to me that what that suggests is that these people are now so infused by this righteousness that they have the right and the duty to close these things down, that this is where we've got to politically, that this is what our elite, and, you know, for that moment, that mask dropped, and suddenly we're really exposed to what they're about. And this does relate to the question that you were posing about what happened during the declaration and the discussion about the Soviet Union. Because what's so fantastic, the pivot today is so remarkable, that all the arguments that the Soviets used to link hate speech to discrimination and violence, which were rejected by the West because they defended free speech, are the very arguments that the EU bureaucrats are using today to justify hate speech. That there is this inevitable link between hate, you know, thought, hate speech, and then action, discrimination, violence, rape, genocide. It's a continuum. It's like a slippery slope. You have all this kind of, and that argument was exactly what the Soviets were trying to argue, and the West rejected it 100% correctly. Every single effort that was made to do that. However, they got it through on the convention because they linked that, and then that was the kind of open door. This is all in the report, by the way. You can go and read about this because this is very, very important, because the historical shift is so marked that today, you know, they're taking a position that they rigorously argued against, you know, a few decades ago. So that is really, really an important point to keep in mind.
Great. Okay, thanks very much. I can see other people want to get in. This gentleman here at the front has been extremely patient. And then the other, if you could take it to Bill Derodier on that side. Yeah, please.
Yes, Mr. Norman, you said that the EU regards its citizens as patients. With all due respect, we are luxury patients compared to citizens in Russia, in China, in Iran, in Afghanistan, in Rwanda. What do they say then? And isn't it sad that, I would even say inhumane, that in the 21st century, with all the knowledge, all the wisdom we have, the only narrative is war. And even in language, it will be war, battle of narratives. What is love and peace?
Okay, thanks very much. So Professor Bill Derodier, our visiting research professor, and then this gentleman here in the grey jacket with the tie, please. Yep.
Well, I think we have to start from how the control of hate speech presumes itself to be protecting the weakest and most powerless figures in society. That's the presumption behind this. And unfortunately, it meets with a well-minded public who think that that's a good thing because people are of good intention. And I think if you want to be successful, you have to first of all demonstrate that you are not protecting the weak and powerless, you are patronizing minorities. You are saying, you cannot protect yourselves, you need us to look after you, and you need our codes. Secondly, you have to say, that the real people being protected by this are the already powerful. They decide what is allowed to be said, those already in positions of power. Thirdly, it dismisses all of us, all of the rest of us. We're not in minorities necessarily, we're not the already powerful, but it dismisses everybody else by deciding for us what we are allowed to hear. That is my personal biggest concern in relation to this. It's not the speaker. It is that I am prevented from hearing, and it is a judgment about my ability to interpret and my actions afterwards. So, as I think the point was well made, better a battle of ideas, and I disagree with the previous comment about a war this and war that, and wouldn't it be wonderful if we had peace? Better a battle of words than breeding resentment towards a real battle. That's why we have to have this. And finally, I think they hope, their intention is that we will all learn to control our sentiments and our words based on how they instruct us to control this. And the consequence of that is that we end up doubting ourselves because we do not learn how to speak freely. We actually control, we second check everything that we want to say according to the new codes. And I think that the worst part of all this is, I think, unfortunately, the vast majority of the public, who are obviously not here tonight, are actually quite distant from this debate. They view this as a kind of rarefied intellectual discourse, free speech, this, free... Yeah, very interesting. What they miss is how much damage it is going to bring to them. And that is the message we have to bring out.
Thanks very much, Will. Okay, can I just see who...
Can I answer to it?
Can we just collect a couple more?
Oh,
just
sorry.
remember that, and then you can come back on it, yeah? And then the other microphone, please, Jamie, to the gentleman at the front, please. Thanks. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Arif Mamadov. I am former ambassador of Azerbaijan, but now more known as whistleblower, famous caviar diplomacy scandal in the Council of Europe. Just a few hours ago, there was an assassination attempt on the Prime Minister of Slovakia, and many people associate with the last ingredient for the World War, because the First World War started with assassination attempt, and now everybody was expecting what will come, and now we have this assassination. We wish him quick recovery to Robert Fico. And, you know, do you think that this attack on him is somewhere related to this marginalization of some European politicians? Like, there are like good politicians who, whatever they say, it is, and if it is in line with the Brussels Politburo or Brussels Central Committee, it's fine. So that Soviet Union has not died, it just moved from Moscow to Brussels. So that there are like, Robert Fico is a bad guy because he speaks something against the general line of the party. Viktor Orban is bad guy because he speaks something against the line of the party, or some others. And they are, and they create this hatred toward these people in the public, in the media. They are, you know, unwelcome. When they join some meetings, they are blocked, as it happened in the gathering here. So that what can be done to stop this marginalization of these politicians? Because they are also leaders of democratic countries. Nobody can say that Hungary or Slovakia are not Europe. They are members of the European Union. They think differently. They have different approach on migration, on family values, but these countries are democratic. But they are just blackmailed, attacked. But also, small thing, whistleblowers are one of the key subjects of attacks. If you criticize something, if you uncover corruption, whatever you say is considered almost as a hate speech. You say truth stories with the facts, and you become like infected. Nobody wants to see you. And this is, you know, and I believe that yes, really, the Central Committee moved from Moscow to Brussels, and this is a fact.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I just see, please, on this side, who else would like to speak? Oh, sorry, yes, at the front. And then, yeah, I'll get you at the back. So please, then at the front here. Have we got another microphone for the front?
Yes, Luc Rivet from Russia Today for Brussels. I just would like to ask Norman a real question. Don't you think when you see what happens in American universities and the fact that the craziness is slowly ending, it seems, hopefully, don't you think that the European deciders at the European Commission will soon gag in their own ridicule, in their surrealistic ridicule, where in Belgium, after all, when you see that it's totally, what you mentioned was totally crazy. And another element is the fact that good old saying, rubbish in, rubbish out, is also valid for artificial intelligence. When they wanted to make pictures of the perfect Nazi soldier, they gave it to AI and they came out with SS that were black.
Yeah.
Little mistake. So that's a question.
Thanks very much. Yes, and at the front, please, and that microphone to the very, very back. Thank you, Jamie. Yeah.
My name is Frank Schwalbe-Roth, and I would like to refer to the second speaker from the public. He's German like me. He has white hair like me. He argued, he shares everything which was said here. I'm the counterbalance. I don't share most things which have been said. But the question is why I'm here. I'm one of the founders of the German Green Party. I was one of the first MPs in Germany. In the state parliament, I was the first Green member of the European Parliament, even president of the Greens. And I consider myself, looking on hate speech, as a sort of grandson, intellectually, of Voltaire. You might remember, he said, yes, you're he said, I don't agree what you're saying, but I will do everything which is in my possibility that you can express it freely. That is democracy. And therefore, I'm here, therefore I support the underlying main request, but not what was said on the role of the EU and the elites. This is not important. But free speech is important, and therefore, in the sense of Voltaire, I'm happy that I'm here. Thank you.
We'll come back on that one.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And then right at the very back, please.
Hello, Didier Goffard.
Since the pillar's in the way, you want to come to the front?
I heard you was a non-precedent, what's happened. Huh? And I think there is some nuance to be brought. Do you know, for the first time, it was in Concernoble, you remember some of you, it's because there was no police protection. That was the key issue. Not a banishment of the burgomaster, but no protection of the people, of the heritage, and so on. So that's something that you should maybe correct in your position. That's maybe a no precedent. Let me finish, please. Let me finish. Okay? Because the pressure, you speak about that, pressure, email, bashing, I don't care, we don't care. Because it's not freedom of speech. It's maybe liberté de ton. We should speak about it. Like maybe some of you, which are maybe so young as I, you know, remember the 80s? La liberté de ton. We could express ourselves without too much bashing, to have a lot of humor, as you know. Humor is the opening, that's opening of freedom of speech. And it's even stronger than the human rights. That's the point. vous laisse la parole, monsieur.
Okay, thank you very much. This is Didier, by the way. Right, so lots of interesting points there. You've got short options to reply, but obviously there were some questions directed specifically at you, Johan. So,
this time I would like to object. First, sir, over there with the glasses, you were talking about patronizing the minority. That's correct, but you have to know now that the minorities patronize the majority. That's the first point. You said you were talking about disconnection of this debate with the reality, but I started by that. I'm not particularly, I'm just an attorney. I'm completely connected to my cases. My point is real life, and I started by that. Freedom of speech is not something disconnected now in 2024. It could have been disconnected in the 80s or in the 90s, but now it's not disconnected because they say that your boy is not a boy but a girl. And they say that you cannot criticize that. So this is real life, and this is freedom of speech. They say that on Facebook with AI, on Twitter, you cannot express exactly what you think, and you know that it's more and more difficult. So there's no disconnection with this kind of debate. And this is a very important point for me. Who talked about... and the last thing is that the voices of doubt are there. They are no more ours. And I think that they are more and more violent in their regulation because they know that we know. They know that we do not support that kind of restriction anymore. This is the last thing. And
from the question directed at you from Didier.
From Didier. You were talking about police protection, that's right?
Yes.
I don't know where you are.
Yes, he's right at the very back, but
Okay.
we're not going to have a to and fro.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you want just to give a little bit, I'll just give you a little bit more context to the question, so, and you can address whether this is actually the case. But at the point of being at Constantinople, run by Edificio, which is managed by Didier, at the point of being at Constantinople, Philip Closer made it clear that he would not provide police protection or could not provide police protection because of the farmers' protests and the EU Council taking place and the heads of state. That's what he said. He eventually offered to provide 2 unarmed policemen, and Edificio, concerned about the situation, didn't feel that was satisfactory for the threat received from the activists and Antifa, okay? Now, my understanding from talking to various lawyers is that this is a standard tactic of attempts to cancel things, is that you basically, as the mayor, you say, well, we can't protect you properly, so it's much better for you to back out. It's part of a way of trying to shut down things you do not want to take place. That's my understanding. What's your take?
It's absolutely a standard strategy from the authorities in Belgium, like in France. They always say the same thing. This is the first point. The second point is that police protection, if you read the ban, the question of police protection is a detail. If you read the ban, it's disturbance risks. It's struggle against far right. It's la lutte contre le fascisme, like we say in French, and I think everybody understood me on this point. This is the major part of the ban. And this is the problem, because these authorities in the French-speaking part of Belgium, they perfectly know that they say risk of disturbance, and they go before the Conseil d'État, before the Supreme Court, and the French chamber of the Conseil d'État accept these kinds of excuse, the risk of disturbance. The Flemish chamber of the Conseil d'État reject this kind of excuse and say we suspend the ban. So there was a matter of police protection, surely, but this was a detail.
And actually, sorry, just why I think of it, I do apologise, it's quite important. It's very important to add that actually Emir Kerr tried exactly the same thing with Mr. Benn, tried to say that it wasn't possible to police it, tried to say it was, you know, the threat was too large, etc. The difference here was that Mr. Benn, having founded Arabelle radio station that has lots of political debate and discussion, believed in the importance of conversation, believed in the importance of these debates taking place, and stood firm. That was the difference. Emir Kerr tried exactly the same trick with Mr. Benn, and Mr. Benn stood up against it. Okay, sorry, Norman.
Well, I'm very pleased to welcome our friend from the opposition. No, free speech. Yeah, no, but you did make a very important point, which is that that's precisely why we need free speech and why we should have these discussions. Because today it's not Voltaire that's being defended, it's the reverse Voltaire's. I'll defend your right to the death to not hear the speech. That's what's replaced Voltaire. And that's become institutionalized, and that's what the EU is all about. And so we can't have an open political debate because in other circumstances you'd get cancelled. It gets shut down like they do in the universities, etc. And that's the end of the discussion. So it is a very important principle that I think, to your credit, you raised, and that's the one that we have to fight for. And this brings me to my final point about the pushback, which is this, that no, this thing will not collapse on its own. The trajectory is inexorably in one direction, and that is to shut things down, that is to become more censorious, etc. But what we have to do, and what we've done, and done in practice, is stand up to it. The very fact that we have a lawyer on the panel tonight who's leading a challenge to something that in the past would have just gone through on the nod, no one would have been, you know, it's now going to become a public discussion, and that's precisely the point. And so my attitude to this is that we will make huge gains by going public, by raising this, by standing up and showing people, to Bill's point, the consequence of what this means for them, what this means for ordinary life in Europe, in curtailing the right of people to get together and to discuss things that the authorities don't like. That this is a fundamental freedom, and by doing this, we are showing in practice how you can start to push back. Because at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, they are not on strong ground. They are on very weak foundations. You cannot outlaw ideas. You cannot outlaw thinking. You cannot, and the more that people's experience of life clashes with the official narrative, as we've seen on the streets of Brussels and lots of other countries, cities around Europe, around the farmers in particular, that grievance, that reality, it doesn't matter what the narrative is. You know, people are going to come out and they're going to stand up for their rights. And that's what we've got to, you know, hopefully what we will do through this campaign is lead some kind of a fight back, because we need to raise that flag so others can see it. And hopefully that will bring them to us, bring us closer together to have these kinds of discussions, which will only lead to good. Because that's, at the end of the day, no one has a monopoly on the truth, but we have to fight for the truth in the public square.
Okay, thanks. Before we thank and applaud our speakers, I just have three things for you. My colleague Jacob keeps telling me about to remember the rule of three. So I have three things for you. One, go to our website, our publications section. The number one item is the number one report of the moment. That's Norman's report, Controlling the Narrative. Download that report, read it. It's packed full of fantastic arguments and more depth to add to what you heard tonight. So that's number one. Number two, we often put flyers on the chairs, and they might be advertising the next event or something. And at the end of an event, often there'll be lots of flyers because people have clocked it or they're not that interested in that event. Do not leave this flyer on your chair. I urge you, do not leave this flyer on your chair. Put it in your pocket. If you have signed the declaration already, give it to somebody else. Read, please, it's very short, the 3 things we're asking you to do, which is to get 10 more friends to sign the declaration in 3 languages at the moment, more languages coming, all with an easy QR code. Get 10 more friends to sign the declaration and get them to go and talk to people about the importance of free speech and get another 10 each. We want tens of thousands of people to sign this declaration. And then also, please, use social media to promote it and talk about it. It's our fight together. So last but not least, please go and enjoy the dinner that we've provided. It's a 3-course dinner so that you can talk to each other about free speech, your experiences, and what you think you might be able to do to support the fight back. Thanks to our speakers.